Good evening, my friends. Very, very far deep into the evening here in Sydney, about 4 a.m. It's wonderful to, I wish, be able to be with you live, but still really touched to be able to have been invited to be a part of this gathering of Masorti Jews all around the world over, but also specifically the deep connections that I have with the wonderful community there in London in the UK. Spent many, many years there serving, still very, very close and has a deep, deep, important part of my life that I was there. Um, I wanted to speak to you about the worldwide Masorti movement that we have so many wonderful people representing us tonight. Uh, I've been blessed to have served in many of these regions in South America, where my father's from, and I spent a year working there in Israel, in the UK, obviously in the United States. And now I find myself here in Australia, in Sydney, where I've been for the last not quite 4 years. The Jewish presence here really dates back to the first fleets in 1788 when they arrived. The first set of, I'd like to say immigrants, but really convicts, many of them. And we know for relatively certainly that at least eight of those people who came were Jews. The first synagogue being set up in Hobart, in Tasmania, to the south. Later on, the main immigration centers, I suppose, or concentrations being in Melbourne and Sydney. Now, to give you a sense of size, many people aren't aware how big Australia actually is. It's about the same size as Europe. Um, Yet, it only has about 25 or so million people total. And most of the people, I think it's 80 or 90%, live within uh, 50 kilometers from the coast. The major cities being Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth, and then a smattering of small towns throughout the rest. The vast majority today of Jews are concentrated in Melbourne, the largest city, and Sydney, closely followed. Brisbane, much, much smaller. Perth and Adelaide, also very much smaller. In Sydney, we have in the neighborhood of about 35,000 Jews, and the community where I serve, Emmanuel Synagogue, is a unique model where we have both a Reform and a Masorti minyan, and once a month there's also a renewal minyan. So we have three full-time rabbis, a cantor, and also a clergy member who's not ordained, but who fulfills many of the life cycle events that we have. We have 3,600 members at the moment, and I serve, yes, I'm a Masorti rabbi, but I serve the community. Now, the Masorti community itself, give you a little of an idea, was founded in 1998 or thereabouts, where there was a desire for people to have a little bit more of a traditional style davening. Began on Friday nights. The senior rabbi now, then and now, Rabbi Jeffrey Kamens, he was ordained as a Reform rabbi, but then he went to Israel to study, and now he was I don't know, reordained is a term, I suppose, accepted into membership of the Rabbinical Assembly. And that minyan was begun and has grown. Now we form probably in the neighborhood of about a third or so of the community here, and we're growing. Um, the the community has continued to grow. We fill an important niche here in the market, which much the same as it is in the UK. I find the Jewish community here, perhaps on a slightly smaller scale. In all of Australia, there is about 100,000 Jews, depending on who you ask. Estimates go as low as 96,000 and high as 110,000. Um, but the makeup and the philosophy and the history is very European based. Um, Many the highest per capita concentration of Holocaust survivors are here and in Melbourne. We have a huge influx of Jews from South Africa, from Hungary, also survivors coming from Poland, and obviously before that the immigration from the UK, the United Kingdom. Um, Not a huge Jewish community, but quite a conservative, small c Jewish community, really focused on, especially because of the high concentration of Holocaust survivors, huge emphasis placed on Holocaust education. Um, that is changing because, as everywhere in the world, um, the, the the Holocaust survivors are slowly beginning to leave this world, and so to continue that education, there is a giant question of how that will continue. But the synagogue itself, we have a functioning on Shabbat. Well, we did, and we will go back to that. Um, uh, Two different services on Friday night and two different services on Shabbat morning, a Masorti Minyan and a Reformed service on Friday night. And on Shabbat morning, the same. We have, as most synagogues this size, we have regular B'nai Mitzvah many, many weeks, in several during the weeks, usually at least one every week. Um, Interestingly, the Jewish community here in Australia, in Sydney, we are based primarily in the eastern suburbs. This is the only Masorti community here in Sydney. In Melbourne, there is my colleague Yonatan Sadov. He served in the United States. He served in Israel, and now he's serving here. The Kilat Nitzan, Ehud Bandel was the rabbi there. Adam Stein, he's now in Vancouver, and now Yonatan Sadov. They've been functioning for not quite 20 years. We collaborate quite closely. There's a couple of chavarot and minions around Australia that are thinking about beginning to coalesce, but the numbers just, it's hard to understand the way things are just simply spread out here. Um, and I find also culturally, we have a much greater affinity with the Commonwealth, the UK, for example, versus the United States. Just think in terms of politics, questions of culture, um, we've had much, much, much more in common than the United States with the United Kingdom versus the United States. So looking forward to the future, the growth area that we are seeing now is really with a lot of young families, and then eventually them bringing their parents as well. Much the same that happened, I saw with the time that I served in the United Kingdom. Um, we were gaining a lot of membership because of the product that we offer. That people see that traditional modern approach to Judaism that keeps them grounded. The Orthodox here are heavily dominated, I would say, by the Beth Din, which in itself is dominated by the Chabad, by Lubavitch, and that begins to has a discerning effect of in certain ways beginning to be a little bit out of touch with the needs of what people are looking for. And so the Masorti Minyan has grown, even at mine, not even 4 years here, quite significantly. So we look forward to continued growth. I know we are quite far out of the beaten path, as it were, but we do welcome guests from time to time. We look forward to people being able to come and be um, guest speakers here. I'm happy to come and return and speak as well. But this format of being able to share one another with online conversations, I've already had one 2 weeks ago with a colleague and a former roommate of mine from seminary in Ottawa. I've done one. I have one scheduled in the United States in a couple weeks, and so it allows us to build on these connections that we have. So I hope to give you a little bit of a taste of what the Masorti movement is like here. It's quite fledgling, it's quite young, quite vibrant, growing, but the numbers are nowhere near what it is in places, forget about the United States, even in South America, where it's also relatively new. But here, the resources that we have, we're quite poor in human capital. We just don't have a lot of people. But we try and compensate for that with the dynamism and the newness of what we bring. I wish I could be there in person with all of you, and I hope and pray that the travel will soon be back and we can begin to see one another face to face as well.